The galaxy trembled beneath a bruised and dying sky, where stars flickered like the last gasps of ancient souls. The Eye of Terror, a malevolent wound upon the fabric of reality, churned with furious storms that swallowed light and hope alike. Beneath this ever-encroaching shadow lay Cadia, once a beacon of unwavering strength, now the battered sentinel on the precipice of oblivion. Ruins of Casa Fortress cities smouldered beneath ashen skies, where the cries of the dying mixed with the relentless howling of warp-torn winds. This was a moment pregnant with inevitability, the slow death of an empire, etched in scarred stone and bloodied banners, echoing across the void where empires rose and fell like the tides of a restless sea. But before the tale unfolds in its full tragic grandeur, we pause, because you, yes you, are not mere witnesses, but cherished travelers across this darkened cosmos. We truly love and care for you, for it is your attention, your breath held in quiet awe, that breathes life into these stories. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, clutch your coffee close, and let us journey together into the fall of Cadia. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed stood atop the shattered ramparts of Fortress Cadia, gazing into the horizon where the dying sun bled its last amber light. His face, carved by decades of endless war, was a map of scars and weary resolve. Around him, the last banners fluttered in the choking dust, tattered yet defiant. The bitter wind whispered tales of doom that even the strongest heart struggled to deny. In the twilight of a galaxy at war, Creed felt the weight of millennia settle upon his shoulders, not as a crown, but as an unbearable burden. He had led the Cadian Gate's defense through countless tides of darkness, each victory more Pyrrhic than the last. Yet, tonight, something deeper gnawed at him, a truth unspoken, a shadow in his soul. They were not merely fighting for a world, they were fighting against time itself. The pylon network pulsed faintly in the distance, ancient and inscrutable, casting eerie green light like a ghostly heartbeat. These mysterious relics, older than the Imperium itself, were the unseen pillars that held back the chaos beyond. Their hum was a fragile barrier, the last defiance against a universe hungry to unravel. Cadia was no ordinary fortress world. It was a keystone, a seal forged from sacrifice and blood, a bulwark against annihilation. To lose Cadia would be to rip a hole in reality, letting the Eye of Terror's wrath spill across the segmentum obscurus like a plague of darkness. Creed's eyes narrowed as he watched the warp storm swell in the distance. The 13th Black Crusade loomed, a tide of ruin led by the War Master Abaddon, relentless and unyielding. Within the command chamber, the murmur of officers was subdued beneath the gravity of incoming messages. The echoes of orbital bombardments rattled the fortress like distant thunder, a grim percussion to the chorus of war. Creed turned to his aide, Captain Alestra, whose youthful face was a mixture of fear and steel. The fleets report enemy warp signatures growing stronger. The Black Legion is gathering, she said, voice steady, but eyes betraying the weight of despair. We've held before, Creed answered quietly, but this feels different. The old soldier's heart twisted with a familiar ache, the ache of knowing that some battles were not meant to be won, only delayed. The internal conflict within Creed was a tempest. His loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium was absolute, yet doubt had begun to root itself in the fertile soil of exhaustion. Was this endless war a sacred duty or a cruel sentence? Was Cadia's defense a beacon of hope? or a futile gesture against an unrelenting darkness. The memory of fallen comrades haunted him. Generations of Cadians had bled and died on these fields, their sacrifice etched into the very bones of the planet. But the war had changed. The enemy was no mere invader. It was an eternal curse. In the distant halls, a young officer, Lieutenant Crest, prepared his men for another sortie. Born into a lifetime of conflict, Crest knew no peace, only the grind of discipline and the cruel calculus of survival. He represented the new blood of Cadia, the hope and tragedy intertwined. As Creed observed him, the gulf between generations seemed to stretch like the yawning abyss beyond the warp storms. What legacy would they leave? Glory, oblivion, or something darker, a memory of sacrifice that would haunt the Imperium forever? Outside, the skies bled red with the fires of orbital bombardment. The first tendrils of the Black Legion's assault clawed at Cadia's defenses. Titans awakened, their colossi stepping forward amid the ash and ruin, thunderous and terrible. The ground trembled beneath their stride, a monstrous hymn to the dark gods. Creed's voice rose above the roar of battle in the command chamber. Hold the line, every inch. Cadia stands, or we all fall. His command was more than an order. It was a vow. But beneath the steel and courage, a subtle tension simmered. Allies whispered of evacuation plans kept secret from the masses. The High Lords of Terror sent emissaries with veiled warnings and grim counsels. In his quarters, Creed wrestled with the cruel paradox. To fight meant death, to flee, dishonor. The line between heroism and tragedy blurred with every heartbeat. As the night deepened, the warp storm surged closer, the eye of terror's breath scorching the skies. The pylon's light flickered as if faltering, the universe holding its breath. Creed stood alone on the ramparts once more, staring into the void. He knew that whatever dawn broke, it would not be the same world. The fate of Cadia, and perhaps the Imperium itself, hung by the thinnest of threads. The stage was set, a war for survival, a battle between light and shadow, hope and despair. And at its heart stood a man torn between duty and doubt, whose choices would echo through eternity. This is the story of the day Cadia fell, and why it had to happen. The fortress halls of Cadia echoed with a brittle calm, a fragile silence before the storm's next shattering crash. Within the stone walls, far from the burning skies and shrieking guns, the Cadian High Command gathered. The great chamber bore the weight of 1,000 battles, a place where strategy was etched in voices and maps, and where the fates of millions hung on whispered decisions. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed stood at the centre, a statue carved from iron and fatigue, his dark eyes reflecting the ghostly glow of hololithic star maps. Around him, the generals and officers, seasoned veterans and rising stars, clashed quietly, their words laced with desperation and hidden fear. General Ryzek, a grizzled warrior with scars like rivers on his face, slammed his fist on the map table. We cannot hold this line any longer. The enemy's forces outnumber us 3-1. The Black Legion crushes our outposts like brittle bones. A murmur rippled through the room, tension thick as the dust outside. Captain Alestra, young but sharp-eyed, responded calmly. Abandoning our positions invites the ruin of the entire segmentum. Cadia's fall would unravel the defences across the sector. We must stand. But at what cost? Rizek shot back, voice rising. Our troops are exhausted, starving, broken. We risk throwing away the lives of thousands for a lost cause. The debate simmered like a slow-burning fuse, each word loaded with the weight of despair and hope tangled beyond untangling. Creed raised a hand, silencing the room with the authority born of countless wars. The line holds because we hold it. Cadia is more than stone and steel. It is the shield of the Imperium. We do not retreat. Yet inside, Creed's resolve trembled. He had seen the fires of countless battles consume worlds and men. The faith that once sustained him now flickered faintly, a fragile light fighting the encroaching dark. He glanced to Lieutenant Crest, who stood at attention near the entrance, young and grim-faced. Crest represented the next generation, soldiers born not of glory, but of necessity, moulded by endless conflict. Crest's thoughts were a tempest beneath his disciplined exterior. He had grown up knowing nothing but war, yet the endless bloodshed hollowed his spirit. He watched older commanders like Creed carry the burden of command with stoic grace, but he wondered, what price did they pay for this veneer of control? Walking through the barracks, Crest observed weary soldiers clutching relics of home, crumpled letters, worn trinkets, flickers of normality swallowed by the tides of battle. The young officer's mind wrestled with a growing unease. Loyalty to an empire that demanded everything, yet offered little in return. The tension deepened as new orders arrived from the Imperium. The High Lords of Terror, distant and inscrutable, sent emissaries bearing grim tidings. Imperial reinforcements would be delayed indefinitely. The war was spreading, and resources were stretched thin. Inquisitor Tiber Lauren arrived unexpectedly, a shadow in the fortress corridors. His reputation preceded him, an agent of the Emperor's will, but also a harbinger of hard truths. His presence unsettled many. In a private meeting with Creed, Loran's voice was low, edged with warning. Lord Castellan, Cadia's role is not to be a fortress alone, but a seal. The pylons beneath your feet hold back the tides of the warp. Their fall would doom the sector. Creed listened, the weight of those words crushing. Are you saying we must sacrifice the planet? Loran's eyes were cold, but honest. If necessary, the Imperium's survival may demand terrible choice. That night, the fortress shuddered as warp storms rolled closer, black clouds roiling like the breath of the gods of chaos themselves. Outside, the distant screams of orbital bombardments mingled with the howl of winds that tore at stone and flesh alike. Creed found himself wandering the ramparts alone, the cold biting at his face. The stars were dimmer now, swallowed by the eye's vast maw. His thoughts turned inward, a maelstrom of duty and doubt. Is this defense a noble stand, or a tomb for my people? Meanwhile, the Black Legion prepared their assault with terrible precision. Sorcerers whispered in twisted tongues, their dark magics weaving nightmares into reality. Titans lumbered forward like colossal demons, their footsteps fracturing the earth. Within the command halls, Captain Alestra briefed her unit, her voice calm despite the burning skies beyond the windows. We fight not only for survival, but for the future of humanity. Remember what Cadia represents, hope in a dark universe. Her words were a balm to some, a bitter reminder to others. As dawn broke, a fragile light cut through the ash-choked air. The battlefield outside was a scarred wasteland, pocked with craters and stained crimson. Cadian soldiers prepared to march into the jaws of war once again. Lieutenant Crest stood beside his men, gripping his lasgun as if it were a lifeline. In his heart, a silent prayer lingered, for strength, for mercy, and for an end to the endless night. Creed's final words before the assault echoed through the fortress. Hold fast and remember, Cadia is eternal. We are the shield, the sword, and the flame. In these moments, the fate of Cadia balanced on a knife's edge, between hope and despair, loyalty and sacrifice, victory and ruin. The stage was set for a war that would change the galaxy forever. The skies over Cadia burned like the forge of the gods, streaked with fiery trails, where Imperial shuttles fell and Black Legion assault vessels emerged from the warp like hunting beasts. The air trembled beneath the thunder of orbital bombardments, the universe's very fabric quivering under the weight of war. From the command bastion, Lord Castellan Ursarker E. Creed watched the unfolding apocalypse with a mixture of grim determination and an unspoken sorrow. Each explosion that bloomed like a blood-red flower on the horizon was a promise of death for thousands of souls, friends, comrades, innocents. Yet in this moment, it was not only the external war that raged. Within Creed, a tempest churned, more fierce than any foe. Beside him stood General Kell, a veteran whose years in service had carved him into a living monument of discipline and duty. His gaze was steel, eyes reflecting the dying light. "The enemy's forces outnumber us, Castellan," he said quietly, voice a gravelly echo of a man who had seen too much. "Their siege engines batter the gates, and their warped sorcerers tear at the pylons. The end approaches." Creed nodded, but his mind lingered elsewhere, on the men beneath his command, the countless lives bound to this shattered world. He could feel the weight of command as a leaden shroud, suffocating yet inseparable. "The question is," Creed said, "not if the end approaches, but what it will cost us." Outside, the ground shook as the Black Legion's titanic war machines strode forward. Their footsteps cracked the earth like thunderclaps. Demons swarmed in chaotic waves, spilling over the walls like living shadows. The air was thick with the stench of ozone, blood, and warp corruption. Creed's orders were absolute. Hold the line at all costs. Yet the cost grew heavier with each passing moment. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Crest moved through the ruins with the precision of a man who had been hardened by years of brutal conflict. His squad had been tasked with defending a vital choke point, one of many shattered streets where the battle teetered between survival and annihilation. Crest's thoughts flickered to his home, a distant memory drowned beneath the roar of war. He was a soldier born into endless conflict, but even he felt the creeping shadow of doubt. What are we really fighting for? He wondered, his fingers tightening around his lasergun's grip. Is it Cadia, the Emperor, or simply the next breath? Inside the fortress's deeper halls, Inquisitor Tiber Lauren studied ancient data slate records. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of truth from layers of secrecy and deception. "The pylons are more than fortifications," he murmured to himself. "They are anchors, holding back a tide that could drown the entire Imperium." He rose, determination sharpening his features. His role was clear, to ensure that the greater good would survive, even if sacrifices had to be made. Back at the surface, Creed convened a war council. The assembled leaders debated fiercely, the strain of command etched into every furrowed brow. General Ryzek argued for a tactical retreat to preserve the army, but Creed's voice cut through the discord. "Cadia does not yield. Not while I draw breath," Creed declared. "If the pylons fall, we all fall. This is more than a battle. It is the fate of the Imperium." The room fell into a heavy silence, the magnitude of his words settling like a shadow. As night descended, the battle raged with renewed fury. Warp storms howled, and the fabric between worlds thinned dangerously. Within the heart of Cadia, the ancient pylons pulsed, their light flickering under the assault. The enemy's sorcerers chanted blasphemies, their dark energies writhing like serpents. The pylons trembled, cracks spiderwebbing across their surfaces. In the thick of battle, Crest's squad fought with desperate valor. One by one, they fell, each death a knife to the soul. When the enemy breached their position, Crest stood alone, firing into the darkness until his laser gun sputtered its final burst. His last thoughts were of home, not a place of peace, but the embattled world that had forged him. Creed received the report. The pylons were failing. The seal was breaking. He stared into the void beyond the walls, a silent prayer lost in the roar of war. Cadia was dying, but even in despair, Creed's resolve hardened. The story of Cadia was far from over. It was a tale of sacrifice, loyalty, and the cruel necessity of loss. The fate of the first ground assault began under a sky swollen with war's fury. The once proud plains of Cadia, etched with scars from millennia of conflict, now became a crucible of fire and steel. The thunderous roar of war machines echoed across shattered fortresses, while the dark winds carried the screams of the dying like a mournful dirge. Among the advancing forces strode colossal titans, hulking war gods clad in adamantium, their armor etched with ancient sigils and the scars of countless battles. Their footsteps cracked the earth beneath like the pounding of doom itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests who accompanied them chanted sacred rites, seeking to temper the fury of these metal colossi. Within the beleaguered command halls of Fortress Cadia, Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed stood unbowed, though weariness clung to him like a second skin. His eyes were fixed on the hololithic displays that flickered with the shifting tides of war. The Black Legion's forces surged forward relentlessly, waves of demons and corrupted marines crashing like tempestuous seas. Beside Creed, Captain Alestra prepared the final contingents for deployment, her expression set in grim determination. The enemy's advance is relentless, but we still hold key positions. If we can keep the pylons intact, we hold the line. Creed nodded, yet a deeper shadow clouded his gaze. The cost was mounting, soldiers bleeding out by the thousands, defenses crumbling like brittle stone. It was then that Inquisitor Tiber Loren appeared in the chamber, his arrival swift and silent like a whisper of fate. His voice was grave as he spoke. Lord Castellan, the High Lords of Terror have decreed that Cadia's defense must be absolute, but preparations for evacuation have begun elsewhere. We face choices that will test our loyalty and our resolve. Creed's jaw clenched. Are you saying we are to sacrifice this world? Loran's gaze did not waver. If the pylons fall, the entire sector will be consumed by the eye. Sometimes, sacrifice is not a defeat. It is a necessity. Outside, the battle erupted anew. The shrieks of warp-touch sorcerers tore through the air as they unleashed hellish energies against the pylon network. Arcane shields flickered under the assault, while defenders fought desperately to repel demonic incursions. Lieutenant Crest led his squad through ruined streets, the grime of battle staining their armor. Each step was a fight, each breath a defiance. As they secured a critical intersection, Crest's voice rose above the din. Hold the line, for Cadia, for the Emperor. Yet even in the heat of battle, doubt gnawed at him. The endless bloodshed, the shattered cities, was this truly survival or slow suicide? Deep beneath the surface, the pylons pulsed with energy, ancient and enigmatic. Their light flickered, a fragile heartbeat struggling against the darkness. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests maintained their sacred vigil, invoking rites and prayers, even as the forces of chaos clawed at their sanctum. The loss of a single pylon could unravel centuries of defense, Back in the command hall, Creed's internal conflict reached a breaking point. To fight to the last was duty. To order a retreat was betrayal. The fine line between heroism and hubris blurred beneath the weight of command. Perhaps, Creed thought, the greatest sacrifice is not of life but of hope. The enemy's siege engines breached outer defences, tearing through fortifications as though they were paper. Cadia's defenders fell back, but with each step, their resolve hardened. Crest, covered in grime and blood, fought beside his men, their cries a mixture of pain and determination. The air was thick with the acrid scent of promethium and ozone. As the day waned, Creed sent forth his most trusted emissaries to hold back the tide, while secretly contemplating contingency plans. Among them was a message for the Imperial fleet, a call to sacrifice what must be lost to save what might endure. In the darkness beyond the fortress, Abaddon's shadow loomed, his presence a herald of ruin and transformation. His crusade was not simply conquest, but the reshaping of destiny itself. Nightfall cloaked the battlefield in cold shadow, but the war's fury burned undiminished. Within the command chambers, Creed sat alone, the flickering light casting long shadows across his weary face. The future was uncertain. The defense of Cadia was a battle of blood, faith, and iron will. But at what cost? The answer lay hidden in the broken stones and burning skies. If the galaxy depended on it, the relentless siege tightened its grip around Cadia, squeezing the life from the once impregnable bastion of the Imperium. As the Black Legion's forces swarmed the shattered landscape, whispers of desperation slithered through the fortress halls like venom. The roar of war outside was matched only by the quiet murmurs of doubt within. Among those whispers was a shadow darker than any blade: betrayal. Deep within the nerve centre of the defence, Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed paced the cold stone floor, the weight of command pressing upon him like a tomb. Reports filtered in, some grim, others worse. One message chilled him most of all. A segment of the Imperial fleet, the last line of orbital support, had inexplicably withdrawn from the system. No orders had been received, no explanations given. Their departure left the defenders stranded and exposed. In the corridors, Lieutenant Crest moved among the ranks, witnessing firsthand the suffering bred by abandonment. Civilians, caught between the hammer of chaos and the anvil of war, were being left to their fate. He confronted a fellow officer, voice raw with disbelief. How can we call ourselves defenders when we turn our backs on our own people? The officer's eyes held only cold pragmatism. Orders come from higher than us. We fight where we must, survive where we can. Crest's faith faltered, the foundations of loyalty cracking beneath him. Meanwhile, Inquisitor Tiber Lauren met in secret with Creed. His tone was grave as he delivered a hidden truth. The Black Legion's sorcerers sought not merely to conquer, but to awaken something buried deep beneath Cadia's surface. An ancient weapon of unimaginable power. If that weapon awakens, Lauren warned, it will consume everything. Creed's jaw tightened. The war was no longer simply a battle of armies, but a struggle against forces beyond comprehension. The city streets erupted in chaos as the Black Legion's forces pushed forward with brutal fury. Demonic entities clawed through barricades, their forms shifting with unholy grace. Cadian defenders fought tooth and nail, each death a bitter sacrifice. Crest found himself at the forefront of a desperate counterattack. His squad held a strategic intersection, a fragile line in a crumbling city. Amidst the carnage, he caught a fleeting glimpse of the enemy's sorcerers weaving spells that bent reality itself. fracturing walls into shards of glass, twisting the minds of those who gazed upon them. Back in the command chambers, Creed wrestled with a terrible choice. The defenders were exhausted, supplies dwindling. To continue meant annihilation. To abandon the city meant the pylons might fall, and with them, the Imperium's future. He summoned his trusted officers. Prepare for contingency. If the worst comes to pass, we evacuate key personnel. Cadia's fall will be a sacrifice, not a surrender. The words tasted bitter on his tongue. Sacrifice was the dirge of heroes, but it was also the herald of loss. As the war stretched on, the pylons, ancient monoliths of unknown origin, became the focal point of the conflict. Their light flickered weakly, battered by the assault of warp energies and corrupted steel. Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests labored ceaselessly to maintain the wards, invoking rites older than memory. Their chants mingled with the roar of war, a desperate symphony of hope against overwhelming darkness. In the shadowed corners of the fortress, Creed and Loran discussed grim possibilities. The Empire demands victory, Creed said, voice heavy with sorrow. But what if victory means destruction? Loran's gaze was cold. Sometimes, destruction is the only path to salvation. The paradox of war, the salvation that demands sacrifice, etched itself deep into Creed's soul. Outside, the battle raged through the night. The Black Legion's forces battered the gates and surged into the streets, their dark banners casting ominous shadows. Crest's unit was pushed back, forced into bitter fighting retreat. The cries of the wounded and dying echoed through the broken cityscape. In a fleeting moment of clarity, Crest understood the cruel truth. Cadia was not a fortress. It was a tomb. Yet amid the ruins, a spark of defiance remained. Creed's voice rose above the chaos in the command chamber. We hold for the Imperium, for the Emperor, and for those who cannot fight. We are the shield against the darkness. But even as the words were spoken, the fortress walls trembled under the onslaught. The cost of defiance was written in blood. The stage was set for a reckoning. The forces arrayed against Cadia sought more than conquest. They sought annihilation, transformation, and dominion over all that remained. And as the darkness closed in, the defenders prepared for the terrible choices yet to come. The embers of Cadia's once proud cities flickered in the oppressive darkness, their fires mirrored only by the cruel glow of the eye of terror that clawed ever closer. The air was thick with smoke, ash, and the unyielding scent of despair. The battlefield was no longer a place of glory, but a graveyard for dreams. Within the fortress walls, the tension coiled tighter, a silent serpent ready to strike. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed moved through the war rooms, his steps heavy with the knowledge that every decision now carved fates in stone. The once clear lines between friend and foe blurred beneath the crushing weight of desperation. Whispers of dissent spread like poison. Some questioned the wisdom of standing fast. Others muttered of betrayals unseen, of orders hidden and sacrifices demanded without explanation. Captain Alestra approached Creed in the dim light of the strategy chamber. Her voice was firm but edged with a tremor. Reports confirm the enemy's sorcerers have deepened their assault on the pylons. Our wards weaken. Creed's eyes darkened. The pylons are the keystone of our defense. If they fall, everything follows. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Crest found himself caught in the heart of the chaos. Streets that had once echoed with the proud march of Cadian legions now twisted into labyrinths of smoke and ruin. His squad fought relentlessly, though exhaustion etched itself into every movement. During a brief lull, Crest's mind wandered to the faces of those lost. Comrades, civilians, children. The endless war had become a cycle of grief and resolve, one he feared might never end. In the shadowed corridors of the fortress, Inquisitor Tiber Loran met with clandestine allies. Their discussions were hushed but fraught with urgency. The weapon beneath Cadia, long thought dormant, showed signs of awakening. The Imperium may be forced to embrace terrible choices, Loran whispered. The very fate of the galaxy may hinge on destruction, not salvation. Back in the war room, Creed called for a council of war. The tension was palpable, thick as the acrid smoke that seeped through the broken windows. General Ryzek, grim and battle-worn, voiced the mounting fear. Our forces dwindle. The Black Legion tightens their grip. We may soon be overwhelmed. Creed's reply was resolute but laced with sorrow. We are the shield. Our sacrifice buys time for others to stand. We do not falter. Outside, the warp storms raged with renewed fury. The very fabric of reality trembled as demonic entities poured through tears in the veil, their forms grotesque and alien. The battlefield became a shifting nightmare, a place where steel clashed with sorcery and souls were tested beyond endurance. As the hours stretched into days, the pylon's light waned. Their once bright glow became a flickering heartbeat, each pulse a desperate plea against the darkness. Tech priests labored ceaselessly, their prayers a fragile barrier against oblivion. Creed, watching the light fade, felt the crushing weight of inevitability. Yet beneath despair, a flicker of hope burned, hope born of duty, loyalty, and the unyielding human spirit. Lieutenant Crest, battered but unbroken, rallied his remaining forces for one last stand at a critical junction. His voice rose over the din. For Cadia, for the Emperor, hold the line. Though outnumbered and outgunned, the defenders fought with desperate valor, each moment a testament to sacrifice and unbroken will. In the depths of the fortress, Creed faced the darkest of choices. To continue the fight meant annihilation. To abandon the pylons risked doom for the Imperium. The price of command was a torment of the soul. He reached out, placing a hand on the glowing pylon's fractured surface, feeling its failing power pulse weakly beneath his fingers. This is our legacy, he thought, and our curse. As the chapter closed, the stage was set for the inevitable, an end to the battle, and the beginning of a new, tragic chapter in the galaxy's endless war. Cadia's fate was no longer uncertain. It was written in fire, blood, and sacrifice. The skies above Cadia roiled with a storm not of weather, but of chaos. The very fabric of reality unraveling as the eye's fury crashed against the battered fortress world. Thunder cracked like the shattering of ancient chains, and lightning etched jagged scars across the blood-red sky. It was as if the cosmos itself mourned the impending fall of a legend. Within the fortress walls, a fragile silence lingered, an uneasy calm before the coming tempest. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed stood overlooking the shattered plains, his eyes dark pools reflecting the storm's violent dance. The wind tore at his cloak, whispering secrets of betrayal and doom. The internal struggle that had long shadowed Creed's heart now surged to the surface, threatening to consume him whole. The weight of leadership pressed like a suffocating shroud. Loyalty battled with doubt, duty with despair. In the war chamber, whispers of treachery grew louder. Factions once united began to fracture. Whispers of hidden agendas, of commanders who questioned the cost of continued resistance. Among the corridors, Captain Alastra moved like a shadow, her presence both reassuring and foreboding. She carried messages that could unravel alliances or ignite new conflicts. Her loyalty to Creed was unquestioned, but even she felt the gnawing unease that came with impossible choices. Lieutenant Crest, hardened by blood and fire, found himself haunted by memories of friends lost and hopes shattered. His squad, once a symbol of youthful courage, was now a ragged band clinging desperately to survival. As they prepared to face yet another wave of demonic assault, Crest's thoughts drifted. Is this fight for Cadia, or for a dream long dead? The question lingered like a poison, threatening to unravel his resolve. In the shadows of the fortress, Inquisitor Tiber Lauren convened with secret allies. Their meeting was a convergence of fear and grim determination. The ancient weapon beneath Cadia, long dormant, showed signs of awakening, its power stirring in the depths. The pylon's failure is imminent, Loran warned. When they fall, the barrier will break, and the eye's chaos will consume us all. His words hung heavy in the stale air, a prophecy of doom that none dared defy. Outside, the battlefield had become a tempest of fire and steel. The Black Legion's war engines roared, their iron hearts pounding destruction into the earth. Demonic horrors spilled through the breaches, their forms twisted and terrible, a nightmare made flesh. Cadia's defenders fought with desperation born of knowing the end was near. Each moment was a defiant scream against oblivion. Amidst the chaos, a shocking revelation shattered the fragile unity of the defenders. A trusted commander, long believed loyal, was revealed to be an agent of corruption, his betrayal cutting like a blade through the heart of Cadia's resistance. The news spread swiftly, fracturing morale and trust. Creed's command was tested as never before. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. As thunder shook the fortress, Creed grappled with his darkest fears. Could he hold together the shattered fragments of loyalty and hope? Or was Cadia doomed to fall, not just from without, but from within? His voice, when he spoke, was both a command and a plea. We stand together, or we fall divided. The enemy's greatest weapon is our doubt. As night deepened, the warp storms surged closer, their eerie glow casting ghostly light on broken battlements. The pylons flickered once more, their light a fragile beacon against encroaching darkness. The fate of Cadia, and perhaps the entire Imperium, teetered on the edge of a knife. In the darkest hour, as shadows lengthened and hope waned, the defenders of Cadia prepared for the ultimate sacrifice. Their choices would echo through eternity. And the storm had only just begun. The eye of terror's malignant glow stretched across the horizon like a wound in the very fabric of the galaxy. The air was thick with foreboding, and the ground beneath Cadia trembled with the footsteps of approaching doom. The storm was no longer distant, it was upon them. Inside the command halls of Fortress Cadia, Lord Castellan Ursarker E. Creed stood motionless before the hololithic displays. The star maps flickered, revealing the relentless advance of the Black Legion's forces, endless waves of corrupted warriors and demonic beasts swelling like a tide that would never ebb. The whispered fears that had once haunted the corridors now roared as the very foundations of Cadia shook. The walls, proud and ancient, bore scars deeper than stone could hide. The pylons, those enigmatic pillars of power, pulsed erratically, their light growing faint with each passing moment. Captain Alestra approached Creed with grave news. The wards are failing, Castellan. The pylons cannot hold much longer. Creed's face tightened with the weight of impossible choices. Then we prepare for the inevitable. We fight not just for Cadia, but for the entire Imperium. Lieutenant Crest led his battered squad through the labyrinth of ruined streets. Each step was haunted by the ghosts of the fallen, the cries of comrades lost echoing in the smoke-choked air. They fought not only for survival, but for a legacy rapidly slipping from their grasp. As they cleared a strategic building, Crest's voice carried above the clash of combat. "Hold this position. We buy time for the others." Yet beneath his steely command, doubt gnawed relentlessly. How long can we hold before everything collapses? Inquisitor Tiber Lauren convened a secret conclave within the fortress's deepest vaults. The air was heavy with incense and the cold hum of ancient machines. The gathered few spoke in hushed tones of the weapon buried beneath. Cadia, the ancient device whose awakening could alter the course of the war. "The pylons are failing," Lauren intoned. "If the device activates, it could either save us or doom us all." The paradox of salvation through destruction weighed heavily on their souls. Outside, the Black Legion unleashed a brutal assault, battering the fortress walls with siege engines of eldritch design. Warp energies coalesced into storms of destructive fury, ripping apart defenses and shattering hopes. Demons spilled through the breaches, their twisted forms a nightmare made real. The defenders fought with every ounce of courage, but the darkness pressed ever closer. Within the fortress, betrayal festered like a poison. Reports of traitors aiding the enemy surfaced, sowing chaos and mistrust. The fragile bonds holding Cadia's defenders together threatened to unravel. Creed's voice cut through the turmoil. "Trust is our greatest weapon. Without it, we are already lost." His words were a desperate anchor in a sea of doubt. As the warp storms grew fiercer, the pylons flickered with a dying light. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest chanted their ancient rites, their prayers a fragile shield against the coming night. Creed stood before the central pylon, his hand resting on the glowing surface. The power thrummed beneath his palm, a heartbeat slowing toward its final breath. "This is the price of survival," he thought, "a sacrifice beyond reckoning." Lieutenant Crest, amidst the carnage, caught sight of a fellow soldier falling. He screamed a prayer to the Emperor, a plea for strength and mercy. The war was no longer a battle. It was a trial of endurance, a test of the soul. As the chapter closed, the fate of Cadia was no longer a question. It was a looming certainty. The defenders braced for the final storm, their hearts heavy with the weight of impending loss. The day Cadia fell was coming. The heavens above Cadia burned with unholy fire, streaked by the tumult of warp storms and the trail of destruction left by falling starships. The dying light of distant suns seemed to waver in despair, as if the very cosmos mourned the fate of this shattered world. Beneath this cosmic tempest, the last bastions of imperial resistance clung to life with desperate tenacity. Within the command hall of Fortress Cadia, Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed stood, his gaze steely yet haunted. The relentless pounding of the Black Legion's war engines reverberated through the stone walls, a grim reminder that time was running out. Reports streamed in of breaches widening, of entire sectors consumed by fire and corruption. The internal fractures within the defenders became more pronounced. Whispers of dissent and fear spread like wildfire. The revelation of traitors within their ranks cast long shadows of mistrust. Even the staunchest warriors found their faith tested by the tide of calamity. Captain Alestra, weary but resolute, sought out Creed. "The situation grows. Dire, Castellan. Our forces are stretched thin. Morale falters." Creed's voice was steady, though shadowed by grief. "We hold. We endure. For every fallen soldier, for every shattered stone, Cadia's legacy will not die quietly. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Crest found himself entrenched in the heart of a crumbling city district, surrounded by the dead and dying. His squad, once a beacon of hope, had been whittled down to a handful of battered men. Yet their spirits burned with a fierce resolve. In a fleeting moment amid the chaos, Crest's thoughts turned to home, not as a place of peace, but a memory of what was lost and what they fought to protect. Deep beneath the fortress, Inquisitor Tiber Loran and his clandestine circle confronted the stark reality of the ancient weapon awakening beneath Cadia. The device thrummed with power, its arcane energy stirring in a slow but inexorable crescendo. "The pylons will fail," Loran intoned, "and with their fall, the balance will shift. What follows may be salvation or oblivion." Outside, the battlefield descended into hellish chaos. The Black Legion's demonic warbands surged through breaches, their twisted forms relentless in their slaughter. Warp storms churned above, lightning ripping the skies with terrifying fury. The defenders fought tooth and nail, but the darkness was no longer a distant threat. It was at their gates. The betrayal within Cadia's ranks erupted into open conflict. Loyalists clashed with traitors in desperate skirmishes, each blow a painful fracture in an already shattered defense. Creed's command was tested to its limits. Every decision bore the weight of countless lives, and every order risked tipping the scales toward ruin. Amidst the chaos, the ancient pylons flickered, their light a desperate pulse against the encroaching void. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests worked tirelessly to sustain their failing power, their chants a fragile bulwark against the coming darkness. Creed stood before the largest pylon, the light casting long shadows on his face. The realization dawned that the fall of Cadia was inevitable, but the manner of its fall was still his to decide. Lieutenant Crest, wounded and weary, rallied his remaining forces for one final push. His voice rose above the cacophony. "For Cadia, for the Emperor, we hold or we die with honor." Each soldier answered with a grim cry, a testament to courage in the face of oblivion. As the chapter closed, the storm reached its crescendo. Cadia's fate hung in the balance, teetering between sacrifice and annihilation. The day of reckoning was at hand. The once vibrant world of Cadia now lay cloaked in shadow, its skies torn asunder by the unrelenting fury of the Eye of Terror. The storm above was a swirling maelstrom of chaos energy, warping reality and bending light into grotesque patterns that danced across the shattered landscape. The fortress walls, long symbols of imperial might, now stood, battered and bleeding under the assault of demonic forces and corrupted war machines. Within the heart of Fortress Cadia, Lord Castellan Orsarker E. Creed sat in grim contemplation. His face was a mask carved from stone, eyes burning with the fire of unwavering resolve. The reports from the front lines spoke of brutal losses, but also moments of fierce defiance that refused to be snuffed out. In the War Council chamber, tension coiled thick in the stale air. General Rizek and Captain Alestra argued over dwindling resources and the desperate need for reinforcements. Creed listened but said little. His mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the cruel calculus of sacrifice and survival. "Orders must be given," Creed finally said, voice low but commanding. "If Cadia falls, the Imperium will lose more than a fortress world. We hold here not for ourselves, but for every soul who still draws breath beyond this war." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Crest moved through the shattered ruins, his armor scarred and stained with soot and blood. His squad was a shadow of its former self, but their determination burned fiercer than ever. Each firefight, was a battle against despair itself, a refusal to yield to the darkness encroaching from all sides. Crest's thoughts drifted to the faces of those he had lost. Friends, comrades, innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The weight of responsibility was a burden he bore silently. Deep within the fortress, Inquisitor Tiber Loran stood before the ancient weapon hidden beneath Cadia. The device thrummed with arcane energy, its power a double-edged sword capable of salvation or destruction. The choice to awaken it was no longer theoretical, it was imminent. Loran's voice was a whisper, almost lost amid the hum of machinery. The price of salvation is steep, yet in this darkness, hope may be found in sacrifice. Outside, the Black Legion launched another devastating assault. Warp energies tore through defenses, twisting metal and flesh alike. Demons poured through the breaches, their shrieks a symphony of chaos and despair. Cadia's defenders fought with a desperate courage, each moment a defiant stand against the inevitable. Within the command chambers, Creed faced a harrowing decision. To activate the ancient weapon meant risking unknown consequences, possibly dooming the world in new ways. To hold the line meant certain death for many. His hand hovered over the activation controls, heart heavy with the knowledge that no choice was truly right. Lieutenant Crest, battered and weary, led his squad in one last stand to protect a critical junction. His voice rang out, steady and unyielding. For Cadia, for the Emperor, we hold this line no matter the cost. The soldiers answered with a roar of defiance, their courage a beacon in the encroaching night. As the chapter closed, the ancient weapon stirred, its power awakening beneath the feet of friend and foe alike. The fate of Cadia, and perhaps the entire Imperium, hung precariously in the balance. The sky over Cadia burned like the mouth of some great furnace, a roiling ocean of fire and ash, where once there had been a proud firmament of imperial banners and fortress spires. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and blood. Every breath the defenders took tasted of smoke and molten metal. From the walls of Casa Vortan, the Cadian High Commander could see the unthinkable. The great bastions that had stood for 10 millennia were collapsing into the cracked and bleeding earth. Orbital debris rained down in incandescent arcs, striking the ground with the force of artillery strikes. A dozen once proud strongholds now lay in ruin, their names already fading into the void of history. Yet still, the enemy came. Black-armored warriors of the Black Legion advanced with mechanical precision, their bolters roaring in cruel chorus. They marched over the corpses of Cadians and Chaos cultists alike, each death a mere stepping stone toward the heart of the fortress world. The ground shook beneath the relentless tread of demon engines, their brass and bone limbs crushing defenders like insects. Within the capital's command spire, the High Commander's personal vox crackled to life. "Commander," came the strained voice of his adjutant, "Captain Halbrecht has assumed emergency command of the 1st and 4th companies. He's ordering an evacuation." The commander's eyes narrowed. Captain Halbrecht, the friend he had trusted with more than just his life, had shown his true hand at last. The whispers, the suggestions to preserve strength for the greater good, had not been idle talk. He was moving now to undo everything, to pull Cadia back from the brink, and with it, to destroy the fragile, terrible necessity of the plan. The commander descended the spire steps 2 at a time, las pistol in one hand, combat blade in the other. The corridors were filled with the sound of the dying, wounded men calling for medics who would never come, the distant pounding of Chaos siege guns. He found Halbrecht in the operations chamber, hunched over the central hololith, issuing orders with steady, deliberate calm. When their eyes met, there was no greeting, no explanation, only the weight of years of shared battlefields between them. "You would undo everything," the commander said, voice low but trembling with fury. "I would save what remains of Cadia," Halbrecht replied, his tone not unkind, but utterly resolute. "If you have your way, there will be nothing left but dust. The Imperium can rebuild from a loss, but it cannot rise from annihilation." They circled each other slowly, the flickering light of the hololith casting long shadows over the room. Outside, the city groaned under the relentless pounding of artillery. The first detonation of the deep core charges was less than an hour away. "I will not let you betray this world's destiny," the commander said. "Not after all we've sacrificed." "And I will not let you betray its people," Halbrecht answered. The duel was brutal and wordless. Las pistol shots flared and hissed in the confined space, each one narrowly avoided. Steel rang on steel, blades locking and sliding, combat boots scraping against blood-slick flooring. In the end, it was not skill that decided it, but inevitability. The commander's blade slipped between the seams of Halbrecht's armor, piercing deep. For a moment, the friend he had known was there again, eyes wide with disbelief and sorrow. His lips moved, but no sound came. Only a small exhalation, warm and final. The commander lowered him to the floor, the hololith's light playing across his lifeless face. There was no time for grief. The alarms wailed. Chaos forces had breached the inner sanctum. The enemy was within the walls. Outside the chamber, the streets had become rivers of fire and corpses. The walls of Kasr-Vortan, the unbreakable shield of the Imperium, were breaking. The commander moved to the primary control console, entering the final arming codes. Across the planet, deep within the fractured mantle, the last of the charges came online. A low rumble began to rise through the city, a sound not of war, but of the planet itself groaning under the weight of its doom. The keystone of the Cadian gate was beginning to fracture. Above, the Eye of Terror loomed impossibly vast in the sky, its baleful light streaming through the storm clouds like the gaze of a god that neither blessed nor condemned, only watched. The commander whispered the last rites of a soldier of Cadia, his voice steady even as the walls shook. The gate was breaking, and with it, the world that had defined him. The moment the final arming codes were entered, Cadia began to die. It was not quick, nor merciful. The planet groaned like some ancient beast wounded to its core, a deep and terrible sound that seemed to rise from the very bones of the world. The streets trembled beneath the boots of soldiers and heretics alike, and from the cracks in the ferrocrete streets came the first hiss of molten rock. The High Commander moved through the burning capital like a shadow among the flames. The streets were a labyrinth of wreckage. Shattered hab blocks, craters filled with bodies, the skeletal remains of war machines still smouldering. Vox chatter filled the air, fragments of panicked orders, dying screams, and the eerie laughter of demons loose in the mortal realm. Every second mattered now. The deep core charges were armed, but they required time. Time the Black Legion would not willingly grant. If the enemy broke through to the control hubs or severed the relays, the detonation would fail, and Cadia would stand. He had no intention of letting that happen. At the corner of an avenue once lined with Cadian war memorials, the commander came face to face with a towering hellbrute, its twisted sarcophagus screaming in rage. He ducked beneath the swing of its massive power fist, las rounds from nearby guardsmen pinging harmlessly off its corrupted armor. In a single smooth motion, he primed a crack grenade and hurled it into the monster's exposed cabling. The explosion lit the avenue in a blossom of white fire, and the thing collapsed into twitching ruin. He didn't stop to watch it die. Above him, the sky was split by a massive warp rift, a wound in reality itself, pouring demonic legions into the heart of the city. Their wings and claws tore through the choking smoke, their voices a chorus of blasphemous hymns. Yet beneath that din, the commander could still hear the deep, steady ticking of the detonation sequence in his mind. It was the heartbeat of Cadia's doom. And then he heard another voice. "Commander." The word came over the vox in a tone colder than the void. It was his mentor, scarred, bloodied, and impossibly still alive. "You did this." The commander paused in the ruins of a shattered gatehouse, smoke curling from the muzzle of his last pistol. "It had to be done. You've damned yourself. You've damned us all." There was no more talking after that. They found each other in the wreckage of the Casa's outer courtyard, a place they had both defended a dozen times in the long years of Cadia's defiance. Now the banners lay trampled in the blood-soaked mud, and the once imperial statues lay shattered at their feet. The mentor's power sword crackled to life, its blue-white glow cutting through the fire-lit haze. The commander drew his own blade, heavy and unadorned, its edge dulled by years of service, but still deadly. They clashed with the ferocity of men who had nothing left to lose. Sparks flew with each strike, each parry. The mentor's blade was faster, sharper, but the commander fought with the desperation of conviction. The duel took them through the wreckage, over the corpses of fallen soldiers, past burning transports, beneath the broken arches of once proud fortifications. The ground shook violently, throwing both men off their feet. The mantle was collapsing, and molten rivers began to split the streets open. The heat was unbearable, the air searing in their lungs. In the end, it was exhaustion, as much as skill, that decided it. The commander's blade found the gap beneath the mentor's gorget. A thrust, a gasp, a spray of crimson. The old man staggered, gripping the commander's armor with one trembling hand. "Perhaps you were right," the mentor rasped, his voice a dying ember. "But I will never forgive you." The commander held him as the life faded from his eyes, then lowered him gently to the broken ground. There was no time for rites. The timer in his mind was still ticking. With the last of his strength, he rallied the surviving guardsmen to hold the choke points around the relay stations. Chaos surged against them in wave after wave. Black legionnaires, crimson-armored, berserkers, shrieking demons whose bodies shifted with every heartbeat. The hour stretched on, each minute an eternity. The commander fought until he could no longer feel his arms, until every breath was pain, until the streets were nothing but fire and ruin. And still, the timer ticked closer to zero. When the final minutes came, there were almost no defenders left. The commander stood alone at the central relay, blood pooling at his feet, staring up at the eye of terror looming overhead. Its light bathed the ruins in sickly gold, a reminder of what he had fought for and what he had destroyed. The ground shuddered one last time. The keystone was breaking. The first great fracture ripped across Cadia's surface like the stroke of a god's blade. It began as a deep, resonant crack, a sound that rolled through the molten deep earth and up into the bones of every living soul upon it. Then came the light, not the golden radiance of the Emperor, but a searing, white-hot glare as the planet's mantle tore open, spewing rivers of magma into the sky. Casas, cities, and mountains were split apart in an instant. Streets where generations of Cadians had marched in parade were swallowed whole. Fortress walls sank into chasms, their battlements vanishing beneath waves of molten stone. Oceans boiled in moments, sending pillars of steam rising into the burning sky. From the void above, the spectacle was cataclysmic. Imperial ships and Chaos war fleets alike broke off their duels, drawn into the terrible beauty of the end. Great chains of explosions lit the surface as the deep core charges did their work, each detonation tearing away another piece of the Keystone world. The Eye of Terror loomed larger than ever, as if watching with unblinking hunger. Yet as the fractures deepened, something began to change. Its edges trembled. The baleful light dimmed, flickering like a dying star. The warp's endless howl shifted in pitch, not silenced, but strained, as though the rift itself felt the breaking of its ancient anchor. On the ground, the High Commander stumbled through streets that no longer resembled anything human. Towers leaned and toppled into abyssal chasms. The air was choked with ash thick enough to blot out the sun. Every step was a battle against collapsing debris, shockwaves, and the mad surge of demons fleeing back into the immaterium. Above him, a Black Legion Thunderhawk fell from the sky in flames, striking the ruins with a force that shattered a whole district. He barely noticed. His focus was locked on the final objective. The last relay control that would ensure the chain reaction consumed the planet entirely. He reached it in time to see its structure split open by a quake. The relay's conduits exposed like the veins of some dying beast. The commander threw himself into the wreckage, manually completing the override. Sparks spat into his face. Molten steel burned through his armor. He did not stop until the sequence was locked. The ground gave its final groan, a sound like the death rattle of a titan. Then, with a roar that could be heard even in the void, Cadia's surface folded inward. Massive plates of land slammed together before sinking into the boiling mantle. Shockwaves burst outward into space, striking the fleets in orbit. Imperial and Chaos vessels alike were caught in the expanding ring of destruction. Some were torn apart instantly. Others were hurled off course, their hulls warped and fractured. The void itself seemed to ripple as reality bent under the strain. The commander felt the ground vanish beneath him. For a heartbeat, there was only weightlessness, the feeling of falling without end. The sky above was nothing but fire and the gaping eye. Then came the pull. The dying planet's collapse had drawn the warp storm's gravity into a frenzy. He was lifted from the surface, dragged upward into the screaming, shifting light. The heat and pressure were beyond pain, beyond anything mortal flesh could bear. His armor boiled away, his vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. Somewhere in that maelstrom, he thought he saw Cadia, not as it was now, but as it had been. Green fields, fortress cities gleaming in the dawn, children laughing on drill squares. The memory lasted only an instant before it was gone, consumed by the warp's unending hunger. And then there was silence. From the void, the ruin of Cadia was a drifting ring of molten stone and shattered continents, slowly cooling into blackened tombstones. The Eye of Terror had shrunk, its borders drawn tight, yet its presence remained, patient, waiting. The Cadian gate was broken, the keystone was gone, and with it, a chapter of the Imperium's history had ended forever. The sky above the shattered capital burned with a false dawn. It was not sunlight that painted the horizon gold and crimson, but the flames of cities set ablaze, the glow of orbital bombardments, and the bleeding heavens themselves, torn by the rift between the material realm and the immaterium. The siege had raged for weeks without pause, and the defenders had long ceased to mark the passage of days. At the heart of the ruined city, the high palace stood as a black silhouette against the burning sky, its towers scorched, its walls scarred by artillery. Inside, the halls that once held the voices of scholars, rulers, and visionaries now echoed only with the cold footsteps of guards and the whispered conspiracies of desperate men. It was here, beneath the throne room, in the vaults where sunlight never reached, that the pact was forged. The chamber was lit by the cold shimmer of stasis lanterns, their glow revealing the assembled figures, generals, ministers, and priests, each representing a different pillar of the dying empire. At the center stood Regent Malchad, draped in armor more ceremonial than practical, its once polished gold now dulled with grime and dried blood. His eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, but within them burned a stubborn resolve and something darker. Opposite him stood the emissary. It was not human, though it wore the shape of one, at least partially. Shadows clung unnaturally to its form, distorting the edges of its presence. Where its eyes should have been, there was only an abyss, and its voice was not heard so much as felt, crawling into the minds of all present. "You cannot win this war," the thing whispered, without moving its lips. "But you can survive it, at a price." The assembled leaders exchanged wary glances. They all knew the cost would be steep, perhaps unbearable. But desperation breeds strange courage, and their enemies grew stronger by the hour. "What is the price?" Malchad asked, his voice heavy with the weight of inevitability. The emissary's smile was not human. "Your loyalty, your oaths, your souls if need be. In return, I will grant you the means to turn this tide." There was a silence then, thick and oppressive. The priests muttered prayers under their breath. The generals shifted uneasily, knowing that no victory could be free if it came from such a source. But none among them could ignore the truth. Without aid, the empire would be ash before the month's end. Malchad stepped forward, ignoring the quiet protests of his council. He extended his gauntleted hand toward the shadowed figure. "Then we are agreed." The thing's fingers were cold and impossibly long, curling around his palm in a grip that burned like ice. Power surged through the room, the stasis lanterns flickering, as if the very air rebelled against what had been done. Somewhere far above, the city's fires dimmed for a heartbeat, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When it was over, the emissary bowed, not in deference, but in mockery, and whispered, "The tide will turn, Regent. But tides are patient, and they always return." Malchad said nothing. He simply turned and ascended back toward the throne room, his steps heavier than before. Behind him, the council followed, their faces pale with the knowledge that they had just chained their future to something older and darker than the stars themselves. Outside, the siege continued, but in the shadows beneath the city, something had changed. Something had awakened. The dawn after the pact was unlike any other. The sky, still thick with ash and smoke, seemed to hang lower than before, pressing upon the broken city with an oppressive weight. To the weary soldiers on the battlements, it was just another morning in the endless siege. They did not know that deep beneath their feet, something ancient now stirred, eager to honor the bargain made in darkness. Regent Malchad stood atop the high palace's eastern parapet, gazing toward the horizon where the enemy banners shimmered in the dim light. Endless ranks of siege engines and armored infantry stretched as far as the eye could see, their metallic hulls catching the flicker of distant fires. The air hummed with the thrum of war drums, and the mechanical roar of war beasts being driven into position. At his side stood High General Corvin, his armor dented and scorched from the previous night's skirmishes. "We cannot hold another assault," Corvin muttered, "not without reinforcements, and there are none left to send." Malchad did not answer. His gloved hand tightened around the stone railing, and somewhere deep within, he felt the thing's voice, soft, amused, and cold. "Say the word, Regent, and the tide will turn." When the first wave of the enemy charged, the gift revealed itself. It began as a vibration in the earth, subtle at first, then rising to a bone-rattling tremor. The ground beyond the walls cracked and split, spewing clouds of dust and molten light. From the fissures emerged shapes, colossal, armored beasts of blackened metal and chitin, their forms impossibly ancient yet disturbingly alive. Their eyes glowed with the same abyssal darkness as the emissaries, and their movements were fluid in a way no machine should possess. The enemy faltered. Siege towers halted mid-advance, their crews staring in disbelief as the beasts roared, a sound that was not merely heard but felt in the marrow. Then the slaughter began. The creatures moved with terrifying precision, tearing through ranks of soldiers, crushing war engines beneath their clawed limbs. Each kill was swift, efficient, and utterly merciless. No weapons seemed to pierce their hide, and those foolish enough to stand their ground vanished in sprays of blood and bone. On the walls, the defenders watched in stunned silence. For the first time in weeks, the enemy was not advancing. It was breaking. Cheers rose from the soldiers, desperate and half hysterical. But among the officers and priests, the mood was different. They had seen the unnatural precision of the beasts, the way their movements mirrored one another, as though they answered not to instinct, but to a single mind. Malchad knew. The gift was not his to control. When the last of the enemy's vanguard was crushed, the beasts turned their eyeless faces toward the city walls. For a heartbeat, the defenders felt the weight of that gaze, cold, calculating, and alien. Then, as quickly as they had come, the creatures retreated into the fissures, vanishing into the earth as though they had never existed. The soldiers celebrated. The city had been saved. But in the high palace, the council gathered once more, their faces pale and their voices hushed. "What have you done, Malchad?" one of the ministers asked. "What I had to," the regent replied, though the words felt hollow. In the depths of his mind, the emissary's voice whispered again, "The tide has turned, Regent. But remember, tides always return." Far beyond the battlefield, deep in the unlit places of the world, the gift waited. It had tasted blood. It would not wait forever. The night after the victory was eerily quiet. No drums of war thundered from beyond the walls. No horns signaled an enemy advance. Instead, the city lay beneath a heavy, suffocating stillness, as though the world itself held its breath. Regent Malchad walked the torchlit corridors of the high palace, unable to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the black armored beasts tearing through the enemy, moving with the same ruthless coordination as a single predator. Their forms were burned into his mind, and so was the sensation of their gaze upon the city's walls. In the council chambers, the air was thick with unease. High General Corvin sat hunched over a table strewn with battle maps, his gauntleted fingers tapping in a restless rhythm. The priests muttered in low voices, clutching relics as though to ward off an unseen presence. "Celebrate this day," Malchad said, forcing the words out. "The city stands." Corvin looked up, his eyes hollow. "It stands, for now. But tell me, Regent, Why do the people who saw those things cheer, while those of us who command soldiers feel only dread?" Malchad said nothing. That night, the first sign of the price came. In the merchant quarter, a street collapsed without warning. Witnesses spoke of a low rumble, like the grinding of ancient gears before the cobblestones buckled and gave way. From the darkness below, shapes moved, small at first, then larger, their forms only half glimpsed before retreating into the deep. Those who peered too far into the opening did not return. By dawn, 3 more sinkholes had appeared. Each was ringed with a strange black residue that the alchemist could not identify. The city guard reported missing patrols. Entire watchposts were found empty, their doors broken inward, as though something had come from below. The priest declared it a curse. The common folk whispered it was the beasts, returning for what they were owed. On the 3rd night, the truth could no longer be denied. Malchad awoke to screams in the lower districts. From the palace balcony, he saw shadows moving in the torchlight, hulking, inhuman silhouettes, their bodies too broad for the narrow streets. The black armored beasts had returned, but not to fight the enemy. They moved through the city itself, dragging people from their homes, ignoring soldiers who stabbed at them with swords and spears. Malchad hurried to the council chamber, where the emissary stood waiting as though it had always been there. Cloaked in darkness, its form was impossible to focus on, shifting between the shape of a man and something far older. "You said they would defend us," Malchad hissed. "I said they would turn the tide," the emissary replied. Its voice was smooth, almost kind. "The tide has turned. Now the debt is due." "What debt?" "The pact you made was not for your soldiers, Regent. It was for your city, and cities are made of more than stone." Malchad's blood turned cold. "How many?" The emissary tilted its head. "All that is owed. No more, no less." From outside came the sound of shattering wood, then the deep, resonant roar of one of the beasts. The city guards would fight, but Malchad already knew it would not matter. Some victories, he realized, are only the beginning of the defeat.